If you throw a stone into a pool, the ripples go on spreading outwards. A big stone can cause waves, but even the smallest pebble changes the whole pattern of the water. Our daily actions are like those ripples. Each one makes a difference, even the smallest. It does matter, therefore, what each individual does each day. Kindness, sympathy, resolution, and courteous behavior are infectious. If enough grains of sand are dropped into one side of a pair of scales, they will, in the end, tip it against a lump of lead. We may feel powerless alone. Together they can create a stable, free, and considerate society.
Welcome to Trans History. Hatshepsut was a trans man,
but is widely known as one of the first transgender figures.
Hatshepsut was indeed a hermaphrodite who was opening a gateway.
Doesn't seem particularly cisgender.
Then did something unprecedented.
Hatshepsut, known by many as a trans man icon.
And this is why she's become an inspiration to the LGBTIQA+ community.
Hatshepsut, ancient pharaoh of Egypt, they would be what we would describe today as non-binary or transgender.
Darf ich vorstellen, Ihre Majestät die König, damit unter heutiger Definition vielleicht trans war.
Ancient Egyptian Queen Hatshepsut, the first transgender queen in history.
Thutmose III tried to erase Hatshepsut's achievements, which can either be seen as acts of patriarchy, transphobia, or both.
Non-binary icon, Hatshepsut.
Reason Hatshepsut wore a fake beard is because she had no access to hormonal treatments, so she couldn't grow a real one.
Throughout history, we have witnessed innumerable women who have written their names for all to remember, but none come close to the iconic Egyptian female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She ruled in a world where male domination was prevalent. Born into one of Egypt's most powerful dynasties, she came from a long line of great feminine role models who changed the course of history in their own right.
I've always loved Hatshepsut. She is a strong woman who took over, she ruled, she was a great diplomat.
Hatshepsut didn't inherit the throne, she was compelled to take it. Her father had died, her weaker brother had died, and the only male heir was an infant. She did what had only happened once before, hundreds of years prior.
In images from this period, she was the pharaoh.
The male ruler, but as a woman, setting a standard for all future female rulers.
Not just doing this in an ordinary way, but in an extraordinary one.
Hatshepsut was not just some political figure. New research can prove that she was a warrior, fighting for the rights of her country.
When a man says he led a campaign, we tend to take it at face value. When a woman does, we question it.
For years, Hatshepsut has been subject to controversy and conspiracy.
There are some people in the past few years that have tried to push the narrative that Hatshepsut must have been transgender.
Hatshepsut dressed as a man to convince the Egyptian that she has the right to be a pharaoh. But we announce something with evidence.
They are misunderstanding a lot of the cultural references of the time.
Now, we are setting the record straight. Get close up to her monuments to find their real meaning and discover the secrets we overlook.
Hatshepsut, who has deified herself.
One of the evidence, Hatshepsut did anything bad to Thutmose III.
But she's capitalizing upon political theology.
We are setting out on a quest to unravel the full life of Hatshepsut like never before.
She died because of cancer. Means Thutmose III did not murder her.
Revealing the true story of one of the greatest pharaohs and rulers of all time, Hatshepsut.
The most powerful woman in history.
Join myself, Curtis Ryan Woodside, and many Egyptologists as we tell the story of Hatshepsut. This is her story. The year was 1505 BC. Pharaoh Thutmose I and his wife, Queen Ahmose, welcomed their daughter into the world, a young princess, which they named Hatshepsut, meaning the foremost of all ladies. Most of Hatshepsut's life is a mystery, with very little evidence being written down, and what was written, most of it has been destroyed by her successors. The early life of Hatshepsut is really not well documented. What we can work out comes rarely from her predecessors and family members. Hatshepsut was born within the first year of her father Thutmose I's reign. She had a younger full sister, Binefru. Unfortunately, this sister died while still a child. Hatshepsut would then honor this young sister on the wall of her temple. This demonstrates the care she has for her family. This was prevalent in the 18th dynasty. Her father, Thutmose I, had a secondary wife, known as Mutnofret. From this second queen, Hatshepsut had 3 elder half-brothers. These brothers were well documented. To discover more about her family, we must travel just south of Luxor. At El-Kab, these brothers of Hatshepsut are mentioned in one of the nobles' tombs. Paheri was a scribe, priest of the vulture goddess Nekbet, and mayor of Nekheb. Having also served under Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I, he is also shown in this tomb with 2 of Hatshepsut's brothers. One scene, he is giving them offerings, yet in another, his true role is revealed. Here, the young prince, Wajmos, is seated on the lap of Paheri. Paheri and his father are both named as the official tutors to the princes of Thutmose I. The image of the young royal on the lap of their tutor in the 18th dynasty was one of prestige, a tradition that even Hatshepsut would continue in her own reign. This would tell us that somewhere out there would also have been a tutor for the princess, which would reveal that Hatshepsut would have received a very high level of education for the time. By year 2 of Thutmose I's reign in 1504 BC, Hatshepsut would have been barely 2 years old now. There was an uprising in the south. Nubia had been colonized by the Egyptians for centuries now, with power constantly ebbing and flowing between Egypt and the Nubians over this area of land in the south. However, Egypt was in control the majority of the time, using Nubia for their organic goods as well as gold. The Nubians had started an uprising to overthrow Thutmose I. Word would reach the pharaoh and he would set out on his first Nubian campaign. The military events of Hatshepsut's father was written down in El-Kab, in the tomb of the grandfather of the tutor Paheri. In the tomb, he tells us that Thutmose I had a battle against the king of Kush in Nubia. Thutmose personally defeated the king and hung his corpse from the prow of the ship while sailing back to Waset, Luxor now. Along the way, he ordered a new fortress to be built at Tombos in Nubia to ensure a constant military presence there. This is also recorded on a large stela at Tombos. Hatshepsut would be too young to remember this story, however she would be taught about it as well as other battles of her ancestors, which would spur her on when she eventually would rule. The family of Hatshepsut were some of the best military-minded men and women of the age. In 1521 BC, year 19 in the reign of Pharaoh Ahmose, for more than 100 years, Egypt was occupied by the foreign rulers known as the Hyksos. An Egyptian pharaoh named Sekenenra began to fight back against the Hyksos, followed by his descendants. Pharaoh Ahmose would finally defeat the Hyksos, expelling them from Egypt. Pharaoh Ahmose would be known as the founder of the 18th dynasty, the same family line as that of Hatshepsut.
Ahmose, mommy. Ahmose, he is the one who liberated Egypt against the Hyksos.
Yeah.
After 150 years of occupation. He was 18 years old when he liberated his country, and he's the establisher of the greatest dynasty in ancient history, the 18th dynasty. He was a husband of Ahmose Nefertari.
If it wasn't for this man, the history of Egypt would look very different.
Totally different.
That's why his wife and his son were revered for his actions.
Yes, that's right. His wife, Ahmose Nefertari, she became like a goddess later, and I have a lot of respecting from the pharaohs, even from the 19th dynasty. If we go to a city, the first temple in the west bank of Luxor, we see Ramses gave her some offering and respecting.
A beautiful gold and silver axe. The mixture of gold and silver was called Ikram, and this axe was found in the tomb of Queen Ahotep. It shows Pharaoh Ahmose smiting the enemies to commemorate his victory.
Yet it was not just the men who were skilled enough to expel the Hyksos. Queens such as Ahotep, who was rewarded with this necklace for her resistance against the Hyksos, and her daughter, Ahmose Nefertari, would take on the role as tutor and regent to her young son, the same way in which her mother Ahotep did. Ahmose Nefertari also advised her husband much on the expulsion of the Hyksos, making her a big part of the reclamation of Egyptian rule. Ahmose Nefertari was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Ahmose, who also happened to be her brother. Something that the 18th dynasty did a lot was incest, to keep the bloodline pure and royal. Ahmose Nefertari was the mother of Pharaoh Amenhotep I. Ahmose Nefertari and her son Amenhotep I would be deified for their roles in defeating the Hyksos, as well as for founding a new elite village on the west bank of the Nile in Luxor.
We have this beautiful scene of Pharaoh Amenhotep I. This is one of the only times we see the Egyptians mixing colors to get some sort of skin pigmentation, rather than the plain red and yellow that is always depicted. He's shown with a beautiful pleated shirt. But over here is his mother, Ahmose Nefertari. Now, she's shown with completely black skin. This has caused a lot of controversy recently. A lot of Egyptologists think that this skin color means that she is Nubian, but a lot of Egyptologists say it's representation that she has been deified, that she has been mummified. She's become one with Osiris, who's also sometimes shown with black skin to show rebirth. But she's absolutely beautiful, not to be confused with Nefertari Meret Mut, the wife of Ramses II. And these two royals were worshipped at Deir al-Medina.
The son and successor of Amenhotep I would be Thutmose I, the father of Hatshepsut, making Ahmose Nefertari the grandmother of Hatshepsut. This soon-to-be pharaoh would have a long list of strong female ancestors which she could look up to. In fact, Ahmose Nefertari died around 1500 BC in Thutmose I's 6th ruling year. This means that for around 6 years Ahmose Nefertari would have known her granddaughter Hatshepsut. From her grandmother, Hatshepsut would inherit one of the highest titles a royal woman could receive, connecting her to the king of all the gods. She would become the god's wife of Amun. The elevation of women was very common in the dynasty of Hatshepsut. Once Hatshepsut became pharaoh, she would elevate her mother's status and, in a way, make herself divine. Hatshepsut's mother, Queen Ahmose, does not have a clearly defined parentage. She is only ever named as king's wife and king's sister. Again, not uncommon in this dynasty for brothers to marry sisters. At Dir al-Bahri, or Jezer Jezeru as it was once known, Hatshepsut constructed her mortuary temple, but this temple holds secrets not just of the female pharaoh's death, but also her life. On the very first level of the temple, we can see an unprecedented scene. This is Queen Ahmose, pregnant with her daughter Hatshepsut. But this is no ordinary pregnancy. Hatshepsut's conception has been mythologized. She is being led by the god Khnum and the goddess Heket. Then, Ahmose meets with the god Amun.
Queen Ahmose realizes that she's being visited by the god Amun rather than her husband Thutmose I. Now at first, Ahmose believes that she's actually being visited by her husband, King Thutmose I, and the giveaway that it's actually the god Amun are the pleasant odors of the land of Punt. Amun smells like incense, which makes sense in an ancient Egyptian context because the word for incense is senacher, to make divine, the incense that signals the presence of a god. At her mortuary temple, her temple of millions of years, at Dir al-Bahri, Hatshepsut has the first full cycle of what we call the divine birth. We know theologically that the concept that the god Amun was the father of the king as opposed to the actual earthly father, or in addition to the actual earthly father, goes back to the Middle Kingdom. In the divine birth cycle, Hatshepsut shows her father, the god Amun.
She tried to convince the Egyptian that she's the daughter of Amun. And she did depict on the temples that her mother had birth because Amun came to her, and she considered herself as the daughter of Amun.
They sit together, supported by two goddesses. Amun continues to spiritually impregnate Ahmose by holding up an ankh to her.
She was, of course, the daughter of that sacred union. We just heard the example with the first woman who held that title. And now, Hatshepsut, that also belonged to the 18th dynasty, she knew about that. And she knew, in her case, that she was the same, because her mother was also the queen that had that union with the god Amun. So she was right and set for the throne.
Then Amun instructs Khnum to create Hatshepsut in his image, to which Khnum replies, "I will shape for thee thy daughter. I will bestow her with life, health, and strength, and all gifts. I will make her appearance above the gods, because of her dignity of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt." We can even see the spirit, or Ka as they called it, of Hatshepsut being molded by the gods.
The god Khnum, shown as a ram-headed deity, fashions both Hatshepsut and her Ka spirit upon the potter's wheel. And what the divine birth cycle is signaling is that Hatshepsut is inheriting the royal Ka. That is being transmitted via the divine conception of Amun and Queen Ahmose.
She is given many titles here. One names her as the consort of Horus, Horus being pharaoh on earth, and his consort is Hathor, thus making Hatshepsut in effect Hathor herself.
Hathor was very important to the queen. The Egyptians consider Hathor as the wife of the living king and the mother of the coming king. And she was the eyes of the sun god, Ra.
Ahmose is seen on a bed with the newly born Hatshepsut, alongside the goddess Hathor, who is suckling the newborn. By showing this, Hatshepsut is proving that she is divine, something that she would use when becoming pharaoh. In 1493 BC, the 13th ruling year of Pharaoh Thutmose I, in this year the pharaoh would die. He chose a new location for his tomb, a place that he envisioned to be sacred and safe from tomb robbers. He chose a secluded valley on the west bank of Luxor, now famously known as the Valley of the Kings. Hatshepsut's father was the first of many pharaohs and nobles to be buried in this prestigious place. The son of Thutmose I from his second wife, Mut-Nofret, the half-brother of Hatshepsut, would succeed his deceased father, becoming Pharaoh Thutmose II. Hatshepsut would now be married to her half-brother Thutmose II, since he was from a secondary wife. Marrying Hatshepsut, who was from a full royal line, would legitimize his rule more strongly. Hatshepsut was around 12 years old, and Thutmose II was maybe just a few years older. We know from a stele in Berlin that Hatshepsut's mother, Ahmose, was still alive at this time. We can see the married half-siblings alongside Hatshepsut's mother.
The concept of hierogamy. And why is that? It's because that gave Hatshepsut on her mind the great idea that she was indeed the one who deserved the throne of Egypt. And she was completely right, holding, of course, the esteemed title of Great Royal Wife or Chief King's Wife. Hemednesu is the word in the ancient Egyptian language, and these women were not merely consorts, but they were great figures in the political, religious, and cultural spheres of the Egyptian society. First, we have to know who was the first queen to hold this title, and she was Ahmose Nefertari, one of the first royal women to hold the title of God's wife of Amun, a position that signified her as the earthly consort of the god Amun. And this role granted her immense religious authority, allowing her to influence temple policies. And that's why Hatshepsut didn't like it when her father, Pharaoh Thutmose I, with a secondary wife, had another child, Prince Thutmose II, who was the half-brother of Hatshepsut, and then he became her husband. And she didn't like that because she wanted to rule by herself. She knew that she was set for being the king of Egypt.
It was during the reign of Thutmose II that Hatshepsut would begin her role as the devoted god's wife of Amun, performing ceremonies daily in Luxor in adoration to Amun. We can see her dressed in the garb of the god's wife at Karnak Temple.
We know from Dynasty 18, from the beginning of the reign of Ahmose. Ahmose was a very smart guy. He dismissed the Hyksos from Egypt, but he knew that the priest of Amun has power, and their power could defeat anyone, because people, religious is very important. And this is why he created this office, an office to be loyal to him, and his wife could be the head of the office. And they called this office the God's wife of Amun. And this office continued with every king, because she controlled the priest of Amun. And she had an office with many singers. In my excavation, to the north of the Golden City, I discovered a big, large cemetery of men and women. They were the singer of the god Amun in Dynasty 25 in the office of the god's wife of Amun. The god's wife of Amun changed it from a wife to a daughter in the time of Ramses VI. And this really office continued until Dynasty 27. When the Persian came to Egypt, they stopped this office. But what's really amazing, that I did discover in my excavation near the temple of Hatshepsut, the Valley Temple, two ladies, they had the office, the god's wife of Amun. It seems that the people in Thebes did not know about the decree that was made by the Persians to stop this office. Then this office was the religious office for every queen, the main queen of the king. But it never, the Egyptian never thought that this could be for someone to take the throne.
Upon the coronation of Thutmose II, news reached the pharaoh that the Nubians were yet again conspiring against him. This seems to become a recurring strategy from the Nubians at the shift from one pharaoh to the next as an attempt to overthrow the temporarily weakened Egypt. The fortress of his father in Nubia had been attacked. Thutmose II did not go into Nubia himself. Rather, he sent his army south to reclaim Egyptian rule over Nubia.
Hatshepsut was very ambitious woman. Her father, Thutmose I, liked her very much. But based on law, he could not appoint her as a pharaoh. He has to appoint a man, his son Thutmose II. Then Thutmose II was appointed, but she was always having a struggle because she was more strong personality than him. And I think during the reign of Thutmose II, she could be the power.
Behind the throne.
Behind the throne, exactly.
Very little is known about the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose II. Even Egyptologists argue about the length of his reign. We do know that he had 2 children. Around 1492 BC, the first child between Thutmose II and his half-sister Hatshepsut was born. Their daughter was named Nefertari. This young princess would become one of the most important people in Egypt when her mother would eventually become pharaoh. Hatshepsut did not bear any more children. Thutmose II married a second wife, who was named Iset. It would be Queen Iset that would deliver the crucially important male heir to the throne. In 1481 BC, 11th ruling year of Pharaoh Thutmose II, his second wife Iset gives birth to the only male heir. They named the new prince Thutmose III. An issue arises when talking about the length of rule for Thutmose II. Some say 3 years, others say 12 to 13. The long length of reign is more plausible for a few reasons. His and Hatshepsut's daughter Nefertari is shown with them and appears to be older. We know that Thutmose III was 2 years old when his father died. If Thutmose II only ruled for 3 years, this would not be a sufficient amount of time to be showing a more grown-up Nefertari. Had she been 13 years old, this would be sufficient. We also know the year that Thutmose III became a pharaoh, and when he fought his biggest battle in year 21 of his reign, the Battle of Megiddo. And we know this battle took place in 1457 BC. So judging from that, we can only say that Thutmose II ruled for around 12 to 13 years. The reasoning behind his lack of heirs? He died from a mysterious disease. When his mummy was discovered and examined, he had strange bumps and scars all over, while his body appeared to be extremely thin in life. He died in his late 20s, which would also suggest a longer rule than that of just 3 years. This affliction may have caused fertility issues, resulting in the late conception of his son and successor just before his death. Although it would appear that Thutmose II would not have a very long reign, for he died just after the birth of his son. a panic would have broken out among the courtiers. On record, Egypt had faced this issue very rarely. Sobekneferu stepped in as female pharaoh when there were no other male heirs to the throne, around 400 years prior. Ankhesenpepi had taken up the role of regent when her son, Pharaoh Pepi II, was only 6 years old, and that happened 800 years before the death of Thutmose II. What was to happen? The rightful heir, Thutmose III, was a mere 2 years old. It's impossible for an infant to rule. His mother shouldn't be allowed to be his co-regent, as she was not royal. Therefore, the role of co-regent would pass to the only person who had the strongest royal heritage. It just happened to be that there was no other male. So, Thutmose III's stepmother, who also happened to be his aunt, the sister and wife of the deceased pharaoh, Hatshepsut, would become the co-regent with the infant Thutmose III.
No way that this boy, Thutmose III, could rule Egypt. She wanted really to keep the empire strong. If there is a boy will be a pharaoh, maybe this empire will collapse. Then I really think that she took the throne to keep Egypt safe and strong.
The choice of a woman at the time would have not come lightly. In 1479 BC, Thutmose III, the infant, is named as pharaoh just weeks after his father's death. Hatshepsut is now also named as his co-regent. Her role would be immense. Yet, in some ways, she would still need to prove herself as a female co-ruler. Even though women in ancient Egypt had more rights than other countries in the ancient world, and still more than some in today's life, the role of ruler or pharaoh had to be male.
The religious belief for the ancient Egyptian that a male should be a pharaoh, a female cannot be a pharaoh, but also the pharaoh as a male cannot be a pharaoh without the support of the female. Means that even the ancient Egyptian could not consider a female to be a pharaoh, that they think that females could be low in the society. No. The Egyptian thought that when Isis lost her husband and a brother, Osiris, she had tears. Her tears meant the river Nile. Isis, as a woman, she is the one who raised Horus, the young boy, to take the revenge from the devil. Without Isis will be no Egypt. And therefore, Hatshepsut did completely change this religious belief, and she became a pharaoh.
We do not know who Thutmose III's tutor was. It could have been Hatshepsut herself, as the two do actually appear to have a close relationship. Hatshepsut would now be in charge of making all the major decisions of the country. Thutmose III was barely able to walk or say his first words at the time. She was basically a pharaoh, although not denying that Thutmose III was the male heir. For now, on many monuments, they would be shown together. For now, she was merely acting pharaoh, while still performing her roles as the god's wife of Amun at Karnak.
Her initial claim of power was an informal one. Then, from around the second year of rule, an inscription from Sema describes Hatshepsut performing rituals as the heir of the king and daughter-son heir of the gods, a title usually reserved for kingship.
A courtier around this time, named Ineni, leaves us with a splendid quote from his tomb describing the state around the death of Hatshepsut's husband-brother. The king, Thutmose II, went forth to the sky and united with the gods. His son arose in his place as king of the two lands, having assured rulership on the throne of the one who had begotten him. Thutmose II's sister, God's wife, Hatshepsut, is conducting the affairs of the land. The upper and lower lands acted according to her plans. She is a splendid, stern rope of the northern land, and the lady of order, whose plans are great, and with whose words the two banks are satisfied. Then Hatshepsut would experience the same issue that arose at the start of her father and brother's reigns. Upon the news reaching Nubia that a 2-year-old was now named as Pharaoh and his stepmother was Regent, Nubia again started to make plans to overthrow Egypt in this now very weakened state. Within year 1 or 2 of Thutmose III's co-regency with Hatshepsut, the regent herself would set out against the Nubians. Some Egyptologists argue that Hatshepsut never went to Nubia, but damaged fragments from her temple at Deir el-Bahri tell us a very brutal story. Fragmentally preserved inscriptions mention a military campaign to the south in Hatshepsut's own words, to make a massacre among the Nubian peoples. According to the text, the victory was so great that unknown was the number of slaughtered enemies, even though their hands had been cut off. Some say that this was rather a raid of Nubia, gathering goods and reaffirming the trade deals, but the ancient texts say otherwise. We can also witness the army in procession to Nubia, carrying standards bearing the name of Hatshepsut.
When we think of Egyptian queens, we tend to picture them as consorts. Powerful, yes, but always beside a king. Hatshepsut completely changed that idea.
Nevertheless, Hatshepsut was displaying her power. She proudly showed herself at her temple, wearing the 2 wings of Horus as armor, a symbol only worn by a pharaoh in battle. The queen is also shown in the guise of a pouncing sphinx, where she is trampling over Nubian enemies while lifting the head of an enemy with her paw.
And what's remarkable is that those enemies are men. That's something we don't see with other queens. For example, Ti and Nefertiti are both shown in scenes of domination, but they only trample or strike female enemies. So Hatshepsut was visually stepping into a space that only male kings had occupied. Her images aren't just about power, they're about redefining who could embody that power.
And in the same temple, the Nubian god of trading, Bedouin, is shown bringing forth Nubian cities to the queen. Trading had become central to the Nubians, hence why they had a god specifically to protect their trading interests. Hatshepsut was following in the footsteps of her great female ancestor Ahotep, and according to evidence, this may not be the last time Hatshepsut went into battle. For now, it would seem that the relations with northern neighboring countries would be peaceful.
Hi, Salima.
Hi, sweetie. Very
Great
nice to see you.
You too, you too. Let's have a seat.
I've always loved Hatshepsut because, of course, she is a strong woman who took over, she ruled, she was a great diplomat, she made beautiful things, she managed to segue her way through Egyptian society, navigate all kinds of things, and her temple is very, very beautiful.
During all of this new political territory, trying to figure out the best way to rule Egypt, Hatshepsut's daughter, Nefertari, would be around 14 years old now, in 1478 BC, the second ruling year of minor Thutmose III and his co-regent, Hatshepsut. Nefertari would of course be being taught the role of the god's wife by her mother. She was also receiving a scholarly education from her tutor, a man that had served the royal family over the reigns of several ancestors, and who was possibly Hatshepsut's own tutor, Pen-nek-hebet. This man was buried in El-Kab, along with all of the other tutors of this royal family. Here he leaves us with many tales of his life. The King Thutmose II's great wife Hatshepsut. For me, the god's wife, repeated great offerings. I brought up her eldest daughter the Princess Nefertari, while she was still a child at her mother's breast.
This scene is from the tomb of Pen-nek-hebet. And what I love about this scene is we have the man at the bottom here with his family, but above we have the Egyptian royal family. In the text here is the cartouche, and inside that cartouche is the name of Nefertari, the daughter of Queen Hatshepsut, the young girl that this man helped educate and helped form when she was a young child. He included her right here in his tomb. But these three men, one of the men is actually missing, but his name is still above here. It's Thutmose I, the father of Hatshepsut. Next to him, just sort of poking out, he's been sort of erased, is Thutmose II, the brother of Hatshepsut. His name is above here as well. But behind is a younger boy, a prince. We know it's a prince because the glyphs here show us that he's a prince. But above the prince is the cartouche, Men-khepera, and this name we know is Thutmose III. So it's great to see Thutmose III, the stepson of Hatshepsut, and her co-regent, here with his family, but here he's shown much shorter, much younger, because that was what he was. He was very young. So this is incredible to see him as a young prince shown in the tomb of the man that was so close to Hatshepsut and her daughter.
For now, Hatshepsut would be making the major decisions, maintaining reasonable peace with the northern neighbors, and controlling the trade routes in the southern lands. Yet 6 years would pass by with almost nothing memorable happening to write about. Thutmose III would scarcely be 10 years old. Hatshepsut was approaching the age of 33 in around 1472 BC, the 7th year of Thutmose III's reign with Regent Hatshepsut. The stepmother of the young pharaoh was to make a dramatic shift within Egypt, a move so bold that it would ultimately make her an icon of Egyptian history today. Hatshepsut was about to become a pharaoh. There is no concrete evidence on how Hatshepsut became pharaoh. Naturally, a female pharaoh was very uncommon. Hatshepsut does show a strong will and determination that most other queens did not. She came from a strong line of female royals, as well as having a strong father. Her brother husband Thutmose II, who became pharaoh, was a weak and frail man. Hatshepsut was driven to uphold her dynasty's power, and a toddler-aged pharaoh was not a suitable look for the country's leader. She may have been tired of only being a consulting pharaoh. There is, however, also the religious aspect. In year 2 of Thutmose III's reign, when he was barely 4 years old, the festival of the god Amun needed to take place, but on an adjusted scale, since the pharaoh was too young and certain rituals could not be done by the female Hatshepsut, whose official title was the god's wife of Amun.
Before her assumption of a royal titulary, Hatshepsut bears 4 significant titles. She is the daughter of a king, daughter of Thutmose I. She is the sister of a king, Thutmose II, who is her half-brother. She is the king's great wife upon her marriage to Thutmose II, and she is the god's wife of Amun. That title, God's Wife of Amun, bears not only great religious significance as the high priestess of Amun, the imperial god of the Egyptian New Kingdom, but also had real economic power, as we know going back all the way to the donation stela of King Ahmose for his sister and king's great wife, Ahmose Nefertari.
By year 7, the priests as well as Hatshepsut knew that the proper ceremonial festival desperately needed to take place. The decision to make Hatshepsut pharaoh alongside Thutmose III would not have been considered lightly. The priests of Amun, vizier and royal advisors would have deliberated this change closely. Of course, Hatshepsut was the best candidate. She had a fully royal bloodline, and had the title of God's wife. The plan would be for Hatshepsut to pass on her role of God's wife to her daughter Neferura, and then for the queen to become, in effect, the king, a fully ruling woman, shown with the male ruling regalia. As pharaoh, Hatshepsut would be responsible to uphold the balance of the country, an ancient Egyptian concept embodied by a goddess known as Ma'at. To affirm that this was the right of Hatshepsut, the council, mainly consisting of priests, settled on the new throne name for the female pharaoh, Ma'at Ka-Ra, meaning the justified spirit of Ra the sun god. However, Hatshepsut would not be starting a new reign. She simply backdated her rule to the same date as the start of Thutmose III. The first appearance of Hatshepsut's throne name comes from year 7 of Thutmose III's reign in 1472 BC. In Luxor, in a tomb in the hills on the west bank. This is the tomb belonging to the parents of Neferura's tutor, Senenmut. Ma'at Ka-Ra's name was found on jars in the tomb dating to year 7. The tomb had originally been made for Senenmut, but he rather buried his family there. Another mystery around a woman can be found from Hatshepsut's reign in Senenmut's family tomb, possibly the mummy of his sister, the unnamed woman known as the Screaming Mummy. Senenmut was very close to Neferura whilst being her tutor. We see unique statues commissioned by Senenmut himself, where he is shown with the young Neferura on his lap, the standard scene for a tutor of a royal. Regardless, Hatshepsut trusted this man so much to give him such an important role as the mentor of the daughter and the heir to the god's wife's title. Senenmut would now be promoted by Hatshepsut from simply being the tutor of Neferura to now being the chief steward of the female pharaoh, as well as her chief architect. Hatshepsut's small tomb, which had started construction, was abandoned, choosing to rather extend her father's tomb in the Valley of the Kings and creating a burial chamber for herself alongside her great pharaoh father. Hatshepsut ordered Senenmut to hasten work on a very important monument that would be used in the upcoming procession of the Opet festival of Amun. Today we call this the Red Chapel. Inside this chapel, Senenmut and Hatshepsut came up with the fantastical stories of how the Oracle of Amun had chosen Hatshepsut in the reign of her father to become pharaoh. This statement was supported by the priests of Amun, thus affirming that her becoming pharaoh was divinely ordered. The date listed here is in the 2nd year, yet we know Hatshepsut was not pharaoh in the 2nd year, so this is a bit of royal propaganda. The commencement of this construction would be in year 6 or 7.
In this scene we see Hatshepsut put the foundation stone to build this chapel. And it's one of the rituals in ancient Egypt, and still until today, when some prime minister or king establish or start to build a building, he built the foundation stone. And we see that during the New Kingdom and also during the Greek Roman period in Edfu temple.
The texts in the chapel tell us that Amun spoke to Hatshepsut. I will cause you to rest upon my throne. I will seize for you the crook and the flail. I will mold you, that you may make offerings before your Creator, that you may cause the shrines of the gods to grow, that you may protect this land and its people, that your terror may seize that which acts as a crime, and those who plan rebellion, for the times that you may see strength as Lord of power. Then this land will be in your grasp. You will cause the laws to be established. You will subdue chaos. You will cut off the arm of your enemies. You will decree to the living, and they will observe according to your instructions. Welcome, my sweet daughter, my favorite, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Hatshepsut. Thou art the pharaoh taking possession of the two lands, Ma'at Kara.
From this point onwards, she started to refer to herself as Lady of the Two Lands, and sometimes as the female falcon as well. The falcon is represented at her mortuary complex, and there used to be two beautiful falcons on either side of the staircase leading up to the upper level of the temple. But only one seems to have made it into modern times.
Senenmut was also charged with the constructing of the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut for her worship after death. It was here, of course, that they included the divine conception of Hatshepsut between the god Amun and her mother, another way of justifying her divine right to be pharaoh.
You know, obviously, conspiracy theorists, they love ancient Egypt. Why do you think people are always making up new stories?
You know, because, people want to be famous. Look, recently, the two guys, the scientists, from Italy.
Yeah.
They have never been in Egypt. They never took a permission to work in Egypt.
Yeah.
And now they come to say that radar images from satellite, they can show 168 meters under the ground. It's insane.
Yeah.
And they don't know there is many expedition working inside the pyramid. Stanford Research Institute working in the second pyramid. The Second Pyramid projects working there. But the most important that we discover that the base of the pyramid of Khafra is made 8 meters of solid rock, no stones. There is nothing underneath the pyramid at all. And what they show, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark, like strange things. All this like Star War.
Yeah.
Nothing. The Egyptian will never build something like this.
Yeah.
You know, I tell people all the time that if you read the Wadi al-Jarf papyri that has been found recently, it is an important evidence to stop all the nonsense about pyramids.
Yeah.
Because the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, it is a diary of a mirror who was an inspector of the workmen, of 40 workmen. He went to Sinai to take the white fine limestone for the casing of the pyramid. The second pyramid of Khafra still have casing. And he told us many important things about transporting the stones, about Khufu, and about how many years he was living. Incredible, important discovery. And this is why I really think, because any civilization in the world is not famous like ancient Egypt. Because if you talk to a child on the age of 8 and you tell him Egypt, he will tell you the pyramid of Khufu, the Sphinx, mummies, and Tutankhamun. And therefore, many people, I always tell people when I give lectures, if you stand in front of the Great Pyramid and you look at it, you'll never believe that this pyramid built by a human being. Why? Because you don't know. If you study ancient Egypt very well, you will understand that the pyramid was the national project of the whole nation. Every household in the south and the north participated in building the pyramid by sending workforce and food to help the king. And therefore, are you going today to hire 10,000 workmen to work for 28 years? No, you don't believe in that. But the Egyptians believed in it.
Yeah.
The 3 millions who lived in Egypt in the time of the Old Kingdom participated in making the pyramid for the king to be a god.
Yeah.
And therefore, every time I always say, I have been debating the people who talks about the age of the pyramid, or those who talk that the origin of the Afrocentric and all these ideas. I said to people all the time that all the theories go with the wind.
Yeah.
Never stay. Because any theory that has no scientific basis, it never stay.
Yeah.
I have been debating people all my life, telling them, but in the same time, we discover things in the pyramid. We found voids, a big, large void above the grand gallery, the size of 2 tracks. We found a corridor behind the main entrance, and we announced all of that. But we announced something with evidence,
Yeah.
not hallucination.
At the start of Hatshepsut's reign, she is often shown as a very feminine pharaoh. Now at the Luxor Museum is a rare scene of Hatshepsut dressed fully feminine. She wears a long dress with her breasts exposed while offering jars to Amun. Above she is named as the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, and her cartouche is visible, Ma'at Kara. This is a rare scene, for Hatshepsut knew that she could not be fully accepted as a pharaoh while appearing female. She would now craft a new image, being shown with male kingly attributes. The pharaoh is of course the reincarnated god Horus on earth, the son of Osiris and Isis. He could not be a she. So to be accepted by the public, Hatshepsut had to appear as male as possible. Though her titles would all be written with female determinatives, this makes no difference to the basically illiterate greater population.
Now even Hatshepsut is not escaping conspiracy theorists on TikTok and other places. People are now saying that because Hatshepsut dressed as a man, she was transgender.
No, I mean Hatshepsut dressed as a man to convince the Egyptian that she has the right to be a pharaoh, because she knows that based on the religious belief, she has no right to be a pharaoh.
It's extraordinary how people have jumped on this bandwagon discussing Hatshepsut's gender identity, because they are misunderstanding a lot of the cultural references at the time. Yes, she was presenting as a man, but she wasn't presenting as any man. She was presenting as pharaoh. So whomever one was, if one was going to be pharaoh, you had to dress for the part. And that's all she was doing. I don't think she had any confusion about what her biology was. She certainly had been a mother. She had a child. And I think that being male as a pharaoh was something that the pharaoh was. So other women who had ruled before her also were referred to as he's. So really there was absolutely nothing in that. And it's very difficult nowadays for people who don't study the history but just jump onto a visual when they don't have any understanding of the culture and they're trying to apply their current norm or what their understanding is of gender identities and cast it backwards. Because, I mean, if you start doing that, when you see a man wearing earrings in the 1500s in England, is that indicative that he was presenting as a woman? Or what? How does it work? Elizabeth I was not presenting as a man, but she certainly was a ruler. But, you know, where do you go with all of these things? I think people are really confused. They themselves need to think about whether they're going to put their norms and how they can project them back, and is that accurate or not? And also, if you're going to start talking about a historical period, you really need to know about that period.
When we look at Hatshepsut's statues and reliefs, it's tempting to interpret her through a modern lens. Some have suggested that her masculine presentation reflects a personal identity, but that's not how ancient Egyptian kingship worked. Hatshepsut wasn't exactly dressing as a man. She was dressing as pharaoh, and that's an important distinction. In ancient Egypt, kingship was a sacred role, not a gender identity. The visual language of power, the crowns, the smiting pose, the regalia, was ritual, symbolic, and deeply ideological. So while it's important to explore how gender and power intersect, we need to consider that the ancient Egyptians didn't have a concept of gender transition as we understand it today. Hatshepsut's legacy isn't about modern identity politics. It's about ritual mastery, strategic brilliance, and the audacity to reshape the boundaries of authority. She didn't just rule as a woman. She redefined what it meant to be king.
There are some people in the past few years that have tried to push the narrative that Hatshepsut must have been transgender because after she took on the role as pharaoh, she started to dress in the attire of a king, wearing the fake metal beard just like her male pharaoh counterparts would have. And then again, many historians in the early 20th century interpreted this as an act of outrageous deception, that it was deviant behavior in what they viewed as her devious politics. It's very tiring when men are like this. But what all these people seem to simply not grasp or understand is the fact that a pharaoh is dressed in a certain attire. And since almost all pharaohs were men, I mean, let's be honest, Hatshepsut had only been the second female pharaoh in the entire history of the Kingdom of Egypt. So, of course, she would dress in the correct pharaoh attire. She called herself Her Majesty the King. The king being the pharaoh title, but she was and has always been a princess and a queen, a female. To dismiss this as a serious attempt to pass herself off as a man is to misunderstand the Egyptian artistic convention, which showed things not as they were in real life, but as they should be in the eyes of the gods and all that is holy.
At her mortuary temple after her divine birth scene, she is shown as a full pharaoh, but here Hatshepsut appears totally naked, not as a man nor a woman, but as an adult human pharaoh figure. She was now ready to be king.
It's important to separate Hatshepsut's actual early life with how she presents it later when she declares herself king. So Hatshepsut is innovating, as far as we can tell, in the full cycle of scenes and texts, but she's capitalizing upon political theology that was already in place from the 12th dynasty.
The Red Chapel would not be finished in haste. The structure itself was now completed and awaiting decoration, which would slowly add scenes, not even being completed in Hatshepsut's own lifetime. Now the Opet Festival of Amun had arrived in year 7. This would be the first time Hatshepsut would appear to the public, not as supervisor of the child Pharaoh Thutmose III, but as actual pharaoh. The original location of the Red Chapel is not where it is now. It was built along the processional way between the then fairly small Luxor Temple and Karnak Temple. This processional way would be known as the Avenue of the Sphinxes later on. This is the avenue that the Opet Festival of Amun would go along, led by the pharaoh, carrying the god on his sacred boat from one temple to the other, recreating the creation story of Amun and his wife meeting and creating their son.
The Red Chapel of Hatshepsut, originally it was in Sphinx's Avenue, on the middle of Sphinx's Avenue, and Egyptologists, they reconstructed that in Karnak. Have scenes of Hatshepsut gave offering to many gods, and specifically the god Min, the god of fertility in ancient Egypt. And there is a unique scene of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III together with their titles and cartouches. They gave offering to the gods. So it's one of the evidence Hatshepsut did anything bad to Thutmose III. She depicted him with her in her chapel, the unique chapel, and depicted him with him in everywhere. So the Red Chapel, I think, one of the masterpieces and one of the very beautiful pieces of Karnak.
A few pharaohs before Hatshepsut had built chapels along this avenue. The oldest is known as the White Chapel, built in 1971 BC by the 12th dynasty pharaoh Senusert. Then again in Hatshepsut's family dynasty, her grandfather, Pharaoh Amenhotep I, built a chapel, as well as her father, Thutmose I. Her brother, Thutmose II, also started a chapel, and even Hatshepsut's co-regent pharaoh, Thutmose III, created a chapel.
A perfectly carved alabaster shrine. Here is the god Amun, so beautifully depicted. The feathers on his shirt, and a little detail is the name of the god Amun on his belt. This is completely and utterly exquisite.
Yet all of these used a white stone. Hatshepsut's was on a larger scale and created out of red quartzite stone. These chapels were placed along the processional way, used only for the Opet festival. This was a lavish celebration, and all of the public were invited to come to witness this. Since the public were not allowed into the more secluded parts of the temples, and they did not often get to physically see the pharaoh, this was one of the rare occasions that they could set eyes on not only the gods, but also their pharaoh. Thousands of people would line the avenue to witness the parade, and for Hatshepsut, this Opet festival in year 7 would make a grand and maybe controversial statement. The day of the festival, both Hatshepsut and the 9-year-old Thutmose would lead the parade. But today, Hatshepsut would be dressed in full pharaonic guise, with all the attributes that a male pharaoh wears, including a tie-on, flat-ended beard. But one must remember that these are royal symbols of the ruler, nothing to do with gender. It's tantamount to King Charles wearing Queen Elizabeth's purple cape at his coronation, a symbol of royal rule, regardless of gender.
The symbols of the pharaoh, what did that mean to the people?
No, we know that any pharaoh who comes to the throne, he has to have 5 names. He has to hold the scepter and the crook, symbol of kingship. He has to put the copra on his forehead to protect him.
Yeah.
Then there is symbols for the king to be a pharaoh. And this is what happened with every king in Egypt. And Hatshepsut tried to do the same. And she ruled for 22 years. And actually she did protect Egypt from other countries in the east and the south.
People keep trying to project the morals or the mores of today into the past. So if you're going to do it into the past, they're going back in ancient Egypt some 4,000 plus years. It is a completely different culture, a different time period. And these are 21st century Westerners who probably don't even understand the Victorians or Victorian mores. So how on earth can they really think that they're going to understand or be able to interpret what is going on 4,000 years ago in a completely different country, different culture?
I personally feel like she could not care less about wearing a fake metal beard. To her, that was just the way a pharaoh was supposed to dress. She didn't try to deceive anyone by pretending to be a man. Because even though Hatshepsut dressed as a king, it was never her intention to pass herself off as a man. She never pretended to be a man.
Hatshepsut had to embody the role as it was traditionally understood. That meant adopting the iconography of male kingship, not because she was denying her womanhood, but because she was claiming divine authority.
Hatshepsut truly wanted to be known as one of the greatest kings of Egypt. And I think it's important when looking at her reign, not just to see her as a great female king, but a great king in her own right.
Hatshepsut presented herself and acted as a ruler. In images from this period, she was the pharaoh.
One would expect that this would have caused some outrage among the public. The thought of a woman as pharaoh, which probably was the case, as we have evidence of the public making fun of this idea. However, inside the Red Chapel, Hatshepsut tells us a different tale of when the public saw her.
There was a procession to the outside. Then Her Majesty was in front of her father Amun, who was passing by while moving through the crowd. Awe seized heaven and earth. Everyone turned to his neighbor, they not thinking about their own bodies at all. They did not understand. Every man did not know himself. Then their hearts understood, since the god now illuminated that which he had concealed. As Her Majesty arrived at the noble chapel and the great double doors of the Lord of the Two Lands Amun, Her Majesty entering, saying, "I am not far from him, the house of Amun. He caused that I may sit on the throne platform, she being nourished as a Horus."
From this, we understand that the public was slightly confused by the appearance of Hatshepsut as a pharaoh. But then the gods made their hearts understand. The Red Chapel would then continue to be decorated throughout Hatshepsut's reign, recording many important events, but would ultimately be finished after her demise. We will be returning to the Red Chapel throughout to learn about the chronological reign of the female pharaoh.
Well, I think that if one is going to deal with Hatshepsut, one should understand what she was. She was a strong woman, a royal woman, who took control. And as that, she had this duality. She presented herself as the pharaoh, but she was also a queen. So she actually encompassed everything that a royal personage should encompass by being the living king Horus and also the queen. And so it's a very complicated kind of system.
Now Hatshepsut as pharaoh set her sights on greater things. She wanted to extend Egypt's trade on a scale never seen before. In 1470 BC, the 9th year of Hatshepsut and Thutmose's reign, the queen began plans for an expedition to a faraway and mysterious southern land, reachable only by the sea.
Down this hallway is the best depiction of Hatshepsut's expedition, the expedition to bring back myrrh, plants, and many other amazing things from the mysterious land of Punt.
Hatshepsut referred to it as the land of the gods.
A land far to the east where the sun rises, abundantly blessed with products of religious benefit.
Punt and Egypt had been trading from as early as the reign of Pharaoh Khufu in the 4th dynasty in 2543 BC. Although the Egyptians did not often travel there, rather welcoming the Puntites to Egypt. They seemed to have always been friendly and peaceful between each other up to the end of the New Kingdom, where they simply stopped trading. Thutmose III would be around 11 years old now, and he had a keen interest in botany. He would have discussed with Hatshepsut that having the actual plants from Punt, they could produce much of the incense and oils themselves. Hatshepsut ordered a fleet of ships to be prepared to travel thousands of kilometers to reach Punt. Senenmut had the expedition to Punt illustrated at Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. We know who went on this expedition, since it was written down. Joining Hatshepsut was Thutmose and even Senenmut, who claimed to be the leader of the journey. Hatshepsut and her large army arrived at the Red Sea before bravely setting sail southwards toward Punt. Some of the remains of the boats of Hatshepsut have been discovered at the Red Sea Egyptian port known as Sao. A stela was also recently discovered belonging to Hatshepsut's treasurer named Nessi, in which he claims to be the leader of the expedition. He tells us that 5 ships measuring 70 feet each and containing 210 men, including soldiers, rowers, and botanists. A total of 1,050 men and 1 woman going to Punt. Interestingly, the stela of Nessi mentions only Thutmose III, not Hatshepsut. Maybe this was his way of showing who he believed was the real pharaoh at the time. Nessi also claims the journey was in order to extract tribute from the natives of Punt, which comes off as less than peaceful. In reality, Nessi seems to be trying to make himself look more important. The journey could not have been easy for its time. The exact location of Punt is not known. Some suggest Eritrea, others suggest Somalia. Hatshepsut even claims that this was divinely ordered by Amun. Come in peace to my graceful daughter who art in my heart, King Ma'at Kara. I give thee Punt in its entirety. I will lead your soldiers by land and by sea, which join the harbors of incense. They will take incense as much as they like. They will load their ships to satisfaction of their hearts with trees of green, incense, and all good things of Punt. Eventually, the fleet reached the shores of Punt. The Egyptians were warmly greeted to Punt by the king, Parahu, and Queen Ati. Queen Ati's appearance must have made an impression, as the Egyptians depicted her in a very unflattering way.
When we look at the reliefs from Hatshepsut's temple at Deir al-Bahari, one figure jumps right off the walls. Ati, the Queen of Punt. She's unforgettable, shown with a full rounded form, probably representing steatopygia, a genetic trait found in some populations. This isn't necessarily an exaggerated image. Women's bodies have always taken many forms, and this is simply one of them. I think one of the reasons it's assumed to be an exaggerated image is that we're used to seeing pharaohs idealized in art, and this is to reflect their semi-divine status. However, foreign rulers and ordinary people were portrayed realistically, though never disrespectfully, since ancient Egyptian wisdom texts strongly warned against mocking anyone's appearance. And remember, this is Hatshepsut's temple. She wasn't exactly conventional. If the KV60 mummy is indeed hers, she was also a woman of substantial size. It's hard to imagine her allowing a disrespectful portrayal of another queen. On the contrary, Ati's image reflects dignity, power, and respect. Her presence on these walls reminds us that in the ancient world, as today, beauty and authority came in many forms.
Hatshepsut and Senenmut had the Egyptian artists make a great study of Punt, showing their way of life on the walls of her mortuary temple, showing the kinds of animals they had there. The stilted round huts they lived in, and of course the plant life. Even some more exotic marine life that they witnessed. The Egyptians gifted much Nubian gold to King Pharaoh and Queen Ati.
And now it's the first time that she showed to us the landscape of the people of Punt, what she brought from Punt. You have in the Cairo Museum this scene of this fat lady with the donkey. She came. Then really the first time and the most important description of Punt came to us through Sahura of the Old Kingdom and Hatshepsut of the New Kingdom. Beautiful, important scenes has been discovered in the Sahura blocks and also in the temple of Hatshepsut to tell us about that, and also at the same time to show to us how she dedicated her life to Amun.
For centuries, historians have puzzled over the location of Punt, that mysterious land the Egyptians praised as a source of incense, ivory, and exotic animals. One of its most famous exports was actually the baboon, and that's where science has recently stepped in to help solve the mystery. Researchers analysed the chemical fingerprints in the teeth, bones, and even hair of mummified baboons. These isotopes, strontium and oxygen, act like geographic signature. They reveal where an animal was born and where it lived. The results were striking. Olive baboons likely came from the Nile Valley in Sudan, brought north by caravan, but the sacred Hamadryas baboons, worshipped as the god Thoth, pointed clearly to the Horn of Africa and southern Arabia. So we're looking at Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, and Yemen. All of these emerged as their homelands, and that lined up perfectly with Egyptian depictions of Punt, where baboons are shown among the treasures brought back. Then in 2023 came another breakthrough. Scientists extracted DNA from a mummified baboon buried near Luxor. For the first time, we had genetic evidence. This animal's maternal lineage traced directly to Eritrea and eastern Sudan along the Red Sea coast. And because the specimen predates the Ptolemaic era, it suggests the port of Adulis, later described by classical writers, was already active much earlier than we thought. Put these studies together and a clear picture emerges. The isotopes show a long history of baboons coming from the Horn of Africa. The DNA narrows it down to Eritrea and its surroundings, precisely where Punt has long been suspected. And that's important because baboons aren't just religious symbols, they're biological evidence. They let us trace trade routes and voyages across the Red Sea and centuries of contact between Egypt and the Horn of Africa.
This trip was peaceful, as we see the Egyptian army there carrying an olive branch alongside their weapons, an often overlooked detail. In return, they gave many gifts to Egypt. We can see Hatshepsut's men loading giant mounds of frankincense and myrrh. They received much livestock also, from cows, baboons, donkeys, leopards, and even a giraffe. Though most importantly, the soldiers are seen carrying live trees in woven baskets, over 50 trees, which were ordered by Thutmose. The Egyptians loaded all of these items on the ships and set sail back to Egypt. This expedition must have been a profound moment for Hatshepsut, since she recorded it in great detail. Arriving back in Luxor, which the vizier Amenuser had been overseeing the affairs of the state, Thutmose began work on the botanical garden which he had made at Karnak Temple. This was a very unusual space where the young pharaoh would cultivate many foreign plants. We can imagine that the plants stood in large pots throughout this built-up garden space. On the walls of the botanical garden, Thutmose had many plants and animal life depicted. Many plants were even shown in different stages of germination. The garden also contained two small sphinxes, one in the form of Thutmose and the other of Hatshepsut. The plants here were not only for religious practices, but also medicinal and cosmetic. Hatshepsut used to take burnt frankincense and use it as eyeliner. This is a giant offering table, a giant hetep, in the botanical garden here of Thutmose. And here we can see the pharaoh himself inside the offering table. Thutmose really loved to explore and bring back beautiful plants. And here we can see that he is showing himself, giving these as offerings. Thutmose would spend much of his time in his botanical garden at Karnak, from his youth into old age. Thutmose would then even cultivate trees specifically for Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Along the causeway toward the temple was once an avenue of sphinxes, all in the guise of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. But between these sphinxes were many exotic trees and plants. And today we still have one of the myrrh trees from Punt remaining at the temple.
In front of Hatshepsut's temple, there is a garden that she curated, bringing the plants from Punt. And then in Karnak temple, because Thutmose is sort of like, anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you. So in Karnak, he brought things from his Asiatic campaign and planted them there for Amun. So we have Hatshepsut's garden for herself and for Amun, and then Thutmose III's garden for him, more for Amun than anyone else.
What of the enemies to the north? There is no evidence of battles nor conflicts against the Canaanites, Assyrians, or even the Hittites around the early reign of Hatshepsut. Rather, she used diplomacy to not re-establish the trade routes that had been done in her forefathers' reigns, but rather to reaffirm the trade to the north. In Senenmut's first tomb, though damaged, enough is visible to show that during the reign of Hatshepsut, their allies, the Minoan Greeks and the Greeks from Crete, came to Egypt bringing gifts to the pharaoh. In her 10th year of reign, in 1469 BC, Hatshepsut commemorated her efforts in Middle Egypt, in a temple cut into the mountain. This Pharaoh-style temple was started by Hatshepsut and added on by several pharaohs, even up to Alexander the Great. The temple was dedicated to the ferocious local goddess who took the feline form of a caracal. Her name is Paket. It is inside this temple that we get a bit more boasting and propaganda of Hatshepsut's mythology. A large inscription reads,
"Hear, all ye nobles, commoners around. I created these things by the design of my heart. No one could sleep until I. While I restored what had decayed, I annulled the former privileges existing since the time that the Asiatics were in the region of avarice of Lower Egypt. The foreign rulers of Shamal, I disregarded their tasks that Ra would not consent to, for these foreigners ruled without our god Ra. My deceased father, Thutmose I, assigned the rulership to me. I became known at the age of 3 years as a born conqueror. And when I came as king, the cobra on my brow threw fire against my enemies. And when I allowed the abominations of the gods, the Hyksos, to depart, the earth swallowed their footsteps. The primeval waters came one day unexpectedly. Just as it does not happen that a command of Amun is destroyed, my inscription will last like the mountains. As long as the sun shines and throws rays, Ma'at Kara, my name as ruler, will be elevated forever."
This is clearly a bit of an over-exaggeration by Hatshepsut, saying she was a conqueror at 3 years old. And of course we know the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt by her ancestor, Pharaohs Ahmose and Amenhotep I, establishing the dynasty Hatshepsut was born into. It is probable that there were still a few Hyksos still in Egypt that she simply ordered to leave. In 1468 BC, year 11 of Hatshepsut and Thutmose's reign, Hatshepsut would now go on an expedition to Sinai, not only to collect tribute from the Bedouin peoples, but also to visit a spectacular sacred site, the temple and the mines of Hathor, the Lady of Turquoise, high up in the mountains of Sinai. Situated at a climb of 850 meters high, to reach the temple and mines would not have been an easy task back then, and still not now. Hatshepsut took one of the titles as most beloved companion of Horus, and as such that made her the earthly manifestation of Hathor on earth. Therefore she of course had to pay tribute to Hathor at her temple. Hatshepsut did visit Serabit al-Khadem in year 7, when she was crowned as co-pharaoh, one of the best images of Hatshepsut with kingly titles, yet shown fully as female, comes from here, hidden away one might say. This is where the turquoise stone for jewelry and decorations was mined, and the stone was connected directly to Hathor. Accompanying Hatshepsut on the year 11 visit to Serabit was of course Thutmose, as well as her daughter Nefertari and her advisor Senenmut. Evidence of all of them being here in year 11 is abundant from the stela left behind.
I want to show you some artifacts and some stela that were found at Serabit al-Khadem which pertained to Hatshepsut. The first is this one, which we can see here are a bunch of cats, and we have the name of Hatshepsut. This is faience actually, even though it's black and white on the picture. And we can see Ma'at Ka-Ra, which is Hatshepsut's throne name, and it is included with all of these cats. But what I love is this one here is not a cat. This is actually a caracal, and the caracal we know is connected to the goddess Paket, Paket whom Hatshepsut dedicated a temple to. This is actually showing us the god's wife, Nefertari, the daughter of Hatshepsut. We can see her here wearing the crown of Mut with the two feathers of Amun and the vulture crown. And here is the princess Neferura holding out an incense burner, burning it to a god that is now missing. But on the side here, we can see Neferura's cartouche, sort of damaged, but we still see the Ra and some Nefer signs going down. Hatshepsut here, and this was still during the time when Hatshepsut would present dressed fully feminine. We can see her standing here in front, burning incense to the goddess Hathor. Her name is here, Hathor. And here are two priests behind. The first priest, his name is really interesting. His name is Sam. And this is the priest here, Esem, Sam. And Hatshepsut is in front wearing a long dress and the crown of Mut, of the goddess Mut. She's burning incense and her name is here above. And now we know that this is beyond year 7 because her royal cartouche with her throne name appears. It's not just Hatshepsut, she's also Ma'at Kara. So this is Pharaoh Hatshepsut, still as the god's wife, but already as Pharaoh. And I just love seeing these images of Hatshepsut as a king, dressed still as a queen. And we have more evidence of this from Serabit al-Khadem. Here we can see Hatshepsut, her head and her torso are missing, but this is her legs, seated statue of Hatshepsut, and you can see she's wearing a long feminine dress with her name Hatshepsut here, Amun Hatshepsut, and on this side, removed, is Ma'at Kara. So this is year 7, when she's still presented as fully feminine as a pharaoh before she started wearing the kingly garments. Hatshepsut here is also listed as Sa-ra, not Tara. Sa-ra, the son of the sun god Ra, instead of Tara, which is the daughter. Of course, Senenmut also came to Serabit al-Khadem, and on this stela, which was quite amazing, we can see Neferura right here offering an incense cone to Hathor. Here's Neferura's cartouche. You can see the 3 Nefers, which is the plural for Neferu, Ra, with the sun god on top. But behind Neferura is this man who is holding a fan. And this is talking about the time that they came here to give offerings to the Lady of Turquoise, Hathor. But this man is Senenmut, and his name is right above. So it's great that Senenmut also wanted to be documented at this place, going there with Hatshepsut and her daughter and Thutmose III. This is a stela. The image is extremely overexposed. We can't really see what's happening since this is from one of the early expeditions. But what we can make out is we do have Senenmut shown here, nobody else, just Senenmut. And at the bottom are all these numbers. And these numbers are indicating the offerings that were left at the temple at Serabit al-Khadem in Sinai, as well as the amount of turquoise and other minerals that Senenmut took back to mainland Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, of course, and Senenmut wanted to document this.
Outside the cave of Hathor here at Serabit al-Khadim, we have this very intriguing stela. We see this pharaoh over here, shown quite regal, the blue crown, the skirt. This would appear to be a man, but this is not a man. This is Pharaoh Hatshepsut. And her name is here, Ma'at Kara, in the cartouche. And she's giving an offering of an incense cone to a very interesting goddess. We can tell here that this is a gift to the goddess, but the goddess's name here is Sara Meri, daughter of the sun, the happy one. And Sara would usually be referred to as, the child, the son, or the daughter of the god Ra, which is reserved for the pharaoh. So it would appear that this goddess here might in fact be Hatshepsut, who has deified herself, like we see many other pharaohs doing. Oh,
Here, another piece that was found shows the updated relationship between the two rulers. At the Grand Egyptian Museum, the world's largest museum dedicated to one civilization, is a scene from Sinai during Hatshepsut's reign. It shows both Thutmose on the left and Hatshepsut on the right, with her throne name on clear display. But both pharaohs are shown ruling and are at equal size back to back, showing they were equals. Gone are the days where, like at the Red Chapel, Hatshepsut is shown as more in charge, leading the ceremonies, with Thutmose trailing behind.
It's very difficult, of course, to figure out what Thutmose III and Hatshepsut's relationship was. And of course, like any relationship, it probably evolved over time because she knew him from when he was a child. So he might have had sort of an exalted idea of her to start with. Then as he grew up, he might have become frustrated because he felt that she was challenging him and he was not getting his just desserts. And ultimately he might have gotten really fed up. Or maybe, one can make up all kinds of stories. Maybe he was secretly adored her and felt that she was not paying him enough attention and that's why he turned against her. Or maybe it was just like he said, I'm the king and you can't be king. One doesn't know. It's really difficult to tell.
In year 12 of the pharaoh's rule, 1467 BC, Nubia was yet again revolting against Egypt. A large graffiti in Nubia at Tangur tells us, in year 12, third month of Peret season, day 12, the majesty of the perfect god, Ma'at Ka-Ra, under the majesty of the perfect god, Thutmose III, led the overthrowing of the wretched Kush. We know so much about ancient Egypt because the literate wanted to document as much as possible so that people in the future would remember the great deeds and events they had accomplished and witnessed. One such place is the island of Sahel in Aswan, where many of the men working in the granite quarry left their own attestations. One man named T remarked on what he had witnessed of Hatshepsut in battle. I have followed the perfect god, Ma'at Ka-Ra. I have seen him overthrowing the Nubian bowmen and bringing to him their chiefs as living captives. I have seen him destroying the land of Nubia. All this while I was following his majesty. Now one may notice that T referred to Hatshepsut with the pronoun him. This is just a slip of the tongue, as he probably only knew how to refer to a pharaoh as male, since that was the tradition. Nevertheless, the inscription is staggering, telling us of the might of the female pharaoh, and T's informal text is not the only mention of this.
People often describe Hatshepsut as a peaceful or diplomatic ruler focused on trade and temple building, and while that's partly true, the evidence also shows she organized military campaigns. Just like other rulers of the 18th dynasty, there's no reason to think she was any less involved in military affairs than her male counterparts. The difference is, when a man says he led a campaign, we tend to take it at face value. When a woman does, we question it. That double standard really shapes how we read the evidence.
Back in Luxor, on the West Bank, in a tomb of a treasurer who served both Hatshepsut and Thutmose, he was of some importance to be afforded a large tomb up in the hills. In the tomb, Jehuti tells us much of his life story, including the year 12 battle in Nubia with both pharaohs. I have seen this king Hatshepsut and the king Thutmose measuring plunder in the wretched Kush. During this year 12 battle in Nubia, Thutmose was around the age of 14 or 15. Hatshepsut was reaching 38. Having seen that Thutmose was a capable warrior, It was around this time that Hatshepsut made Thutmose the head of the army. He would now be commanding a large army to keep Egypt safe, while Hatshepsut dealt with the political and religious matters.
When people learn about the story of Hatshepsut, often they have one question. Why Hatshepsut did not step down as pharaoh when Thutmose III became of age. Hatshepsut had already declared herself pharaoh before he came of age, and she had sent him away from the court to join the army. This is where he grew up and learned the ropes of warfare, leading armies and, keeping his kingdom safe. Hatshepsut didn't send Thutmose III away simply because she didn't want him around. She actually made sure that Thutmose III learned how to be a great soldier, which is honestly of the utmost importance back in the day, for a ruler of a nation and a kingdom as big and powerful as Egypt was in ancient times. But we also need to keep in mind that back then, during the reign of Hatshepsut, it wasn't really an option for her to step down when Thutmose III did become of age. Because simply put, the moment you took on the attributes of kingship, that was it. You were revered as a god in the eyes of your people. It's not, being a queen for a day or for however long it's needed or suits you. It is being a king for as long as you live, until the day you die.
For now, building constructions would be going on, Hatshepsut working closely alongside Senenmut on these projects. Extensions to Amun's temple at Karnak, as well as works on the temple of Amun's wife, Mut, and furthermore adding decorations to the Red Chapel and her temple for the afterlife at Dir el-Bahri. It is also possible that this is when Thutmose would also start work on his own mortuary temple, built right next door to Hatshepsut's. Extensions to existing temples were made in Memphis, near modern-day Cairo, where all that remains of Hatshepsut there is this splendid sphinx, which is the largest statue ever made from alabaster. Senenmut would also be overseeing a monumental task down south in Aswan. Hatshepsut's father had erected 2 enormous obelisks at Karnak, and she intended to convert that same power, emulating her father by building 2 of her own obelisks. Senenmut oversaw the work on Hatshepsut's 2 obelisks that were being quarried in Aswan. The colossal task to not only quarry, but transport 232 kilometers to Karnak, decorate and erect these obelisks, is left for us to marvel upon at Dir el-Bahri. Although damaged, we can see that both obelisks were transported from Aswan to Luxor on an extremely large boat. The great effort of creating the obelisks is a crowning glory for Hatshepsut and proved her devotion to Amun and to the sun god Ra, as well as proving her right to be pharaoh. Hatshepsut even erected an obelisk down south in Nubia. This is the fortress of Qasr Ibrim. Here the female pharaoh Hatshepsut placed an obelisk as a marker for Nubians coming up from the Nile, that they were entering Egyptian territory. Senenmut was a very busy man, working for Hatshepsut, making several visits to the stone quarries between Luxor and Aswan. He came here to Jebel Silsila on several occasions to collect stone blocks for the construction of the temples in Luxor. The quarry had been used for many years prior to the reign of Hatshepsut. The more upper-class men that worked here had chapels carved into the rock face along the river, here to give thanks to Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of the Nile, though it was more flaunting their power rather than pious. One of the nobles that commissioned a chapel here was none other than Senenmut. The chapel dug into the rock along the Nile is quiet and serene, looking out over the Nile. Not much is decorated, but we do have his name and titles inside, as well as a large yet damage-seated statue of himself. I'd like to imagine that while assessing the workmen at the quarry, he would come here to escape the sun and have a little break while watching the river. It is here at Silsila that a temple for Hatshepsut was started, Although destroyed many years after Hatshepsut's reign by Pharaoh Akhenaten, renovated by Tutankhamun, and covered by Horemheb, yet inside this temple are the slight remnants of a scene showing the transportation of the two obelisks of Hatshepsut. It is possible that the ship carrying these obelisks stopped here so that the men could rest on their journey northward toward Luxor. In year 13 of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis' rule, 1466 BC, there appears to be a slight issue northwards in Canaan. Hatshepsut sent Thutmose up north with the army to resolve the problem, a minor event only mentioned on a stela from Sinai. However, it must have been a great getaway for Thutmose to go to Canaan with his army without Hatshepsut. In 1464 BC, year 15 of Hatshepsut's reign, the female pharaoh would break with all known ancient traditions. A pharaoh was due to celebrate his jubilee upon reaching 30 years on the throne. This event was called the Heb-sed festival. Hatshepsut, however, saw it necessary to bring her jubilee forward. She would celebrate her Heb-sed now in year 15, only halfway to the traditional date. This had never been done before. The festival was to demonstrate that the king would still be strong enough to continue to uphold the balance, ma'at, of the land of Egypt. Traditionally, the Jubilee was celebrated up north in Memphis. This time, it took place in Luxor. At Deir el-Bahri, she showed herself wearing the traditional cloak of the Jubilee. Badly damaged though, many scenes of Hatshepsut's Jubilee can still be deciphered. One scene shows her wearing the double crown, covered in the cloak, holding the crook and flail, while a high priest reads a prayer for her. May you live with your spirit like Ra forever. On another scene, Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I, is seated on the throne, wearing the Heb-sed cloak, with Hatshepsut shown as a crowned young pharaoh before him. Here, she claims her father proclaimed this jubilee for her. She is referred to as daughter, Sa'at, of the king, when referred to as Hatshepsut, but son, Sara, when referred to as her throne name, Ma'at Kara. This scene may suggest that Hatshepsut counted part of the reign of her father, her brother, and her own to reach 30 years, rather than 15 of ruling. Maybe since her brother was a weak ruler, she saw herself as ruling then too, and that is why, with the combined years, she wished to celebrate a jubilee. Another shows her in a cloak, but now holding a long shepherd's staff, and the traditional tie-on flat-ended beard of the living pharaoh. What is interesting is that Hatshepsut's co-pharaoh Thutmose is here in the celebration, but not performing the tasks to show his strength to the public, which means that this was rarely Hatshepsut's celebration. Hatshepsut's Red Chapel reveals more of this groundbreaking event. The female pharaoh can be seen doing the ceremonial chasing of the bull. She is presenting herself here in a full male pharaonic form, once wearing the crown of the north and once wearing the crown of the south. This was a grand celebration, and we can even see women dancing jubilantly. The Heb-sed was yet another event that the population were invited to watch, making it a great time for celebration. Then she is seen striding towards the god Amun-min, who is known for his fertile procreativity powers.
The Red Chapel of Hatshepsut contains so many scenes of Hatshepsut as well as Thutmose III, her stepson. But what I really find so intriguing is that we can see Hatshepsut here shown as a male pharaoh, as a man. However, above the image of Hatshepsut, we can see her name, Hatshepsut. This is a woman dressed, presenting herself to the public as a man, giving offerings before Amun-min, the male god of fertility. Up here, we have Hatshepsut running in her Jubilee celebration. It's quite incredible to think that this woman had to go to the extent of showing herself as a male ruler just to be accepted, when a couple hundred years before her, we have Sobek Neferu, who presented herself as a woman, as a pharaoh. In the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut, right here in this basin, would have been filled with water that the Egyptians would have washed the lettuce that they would have offered to the god Amun-min on the inside. Lettuce, as we know, was the main offering to Amun-min.
This lettuce, when broken in half, would leak a thick white liquid, symbolizing the white fluid Min would bless a man with to reproduce children.
So when they would wash the lettuce in this basin, it would drain off on the sides. They would bring the lettuce from the basin and place it on the offering table with drainage again before a statue of Amun-min.
The Heb-sed was clearly a very important event for Hatshepsut, a time that probably filled her with great joy and pride. It would be in this same year, however, that not one, but two tragedies would strike Hatshepsut. Her beloved daughter, the god's wife of Amun, has died. Hatshepsut must have been broken-hearted by this and would have gone into the traditional 70 days of mourning. She had no other direct heir, nor did Neferura have a child. Neferura would have been around 28 years old. Because her death appears to be sudden, Hatshepsut buried her in an unfinished tomb. She chose the valley on the opposite side of the Valley of the Kings, more near what we call today the Valley of the Queens. This was near the tomb Hatshepsut abandoned construction on when she became pharaoh in year 7 of Thutmose III's reign. Hatshepsut chose a very bizarre location, high up in the cliffs of the valley. Perhaps it was to protect her daughter's body from future vandals. The tomb was roughly cut, the walls were plastered but not decorated, with only the cartouche of Neferura inside, as well as a red scarab with the princess's cartouche. This well-hidden tomb was discovered by Howard Carter, the same man that discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. Howard Carter even left his name graffitied inside, something quite common for him, as he did this innumerable times throughout his travels in Egypt. Then again, in the same year, Hatshepsut's closest advisor, her chief architect, and the tutor to her daughter, Senenmut, also dies. Rather than being buried in his original tomb high up on the mountains, which is where he buried his parents, Senenmut had ordered himself a new tomb to be made right next to the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, as a way to be forever connected to Hatshepsut. Senenmut made such innovations with this new tomb. For the first time, an astronomical ceiling was put into a tomb. This design, created by Senenmut himself, would then go on to be repeated in many pharaohs' royal tombs. His legacy would live on. It appears that Senenmut also died unexpectedly, as the tomb is not complete. We do not have his mummy, yet a non-royal man's mummy was discovered in the cache from when the Egyptian priests relocated the royal mummies for safekeeping. This man is from the 18th dynasty and appears to have been over 50 years old, which would correlate with what we know of Senenmut. This mummy has a striking feature. He does appear to have very deep lines around the nose and mouth. Inside Senenmut's final tomb, in the unfinished hallway, there is an image of a man. This image is not graffiti. It is drawn on a grid, the same grid that the artists used to lay out the inscriptions with. It is Senenmut, and he is shown with the same defined lines around the mouth and nose. This image was designed by Senenmut for his tomb. No doubt he actually looked like this. Usually these kinds of features are not shown unless it was that distinct. But can we confirm this? Discovered just outside his first tomb, the workmen there left behind 3 draft images, all of which appear to be the same man, the owner of the tomb. One ostracon shows what is clearly Senenmut twice, and yes, they included the very same smile lines and his bumped nose. The other shows a more skilled drawing on a grid, with Senenmut again with all his distinct features. Senenmut is known to have not married nor conceived any children. And even his half-brother is said to perform the funerary rites on him, not a son. The last date in Senenmut's final tomb is around year 15 or 16 of Hatshepsut's reign. There is no mention of Neferura in his tomb, which is rather strange, since he commissioned several statues of them together. From this we can understand that Neferura was already dead by the time these inscriptions were made. Outside Senenmut's original tomb, we learn he did, however, intend to include Neferura. He commissioned 2 statues of himself with Neferura as a child on his lap, again showing their close relationship. There is, however, a larger statue nearby. This statue has an obscure side to it. It was never finished nor used. Some suggest that it was of an assistant and possible half-brother to Senenmut named Seniamen. Seniamen is known to have assisted in tutoring Neferura. His tomb is next to the first tomb of Senenmut, though a rather insignificant burial. In Senenmut's first tomb, Seniamen is shown with a woman next to him named Senemia. This is the mother of Seniamen. The outside statue shows an unnamed man kneeling down with Neferura on his lap, but next to him stands an unnamed woman. This woman has her one hand on the shoulder of the man, the typical symbol of support. This is unlikely to be a marriage statue, as the positioning of the hands would either be at the waist or the woman would be holding the husband's arm with her arm crossing over. It could, however, be a mother and son statue with the mother standing and holding her son's shoulder. However, this would be unlikely to be Seniamen. We have no other evidence that these statues were being made for anyone else rather than Senenmut and Neferura. So who is this woman? It could be Senenmut's mother that he buried in his tomb. This woman is wearing a thick, long hairstyle, a long dress, and her right arm is raised, holding a sistrum. Egyptian queens are often shown with their left arm raised, but the right arm can't be ruled out always. The reverse goes for Egyptian noblewomen. She could be a grown-up Neferura, unlikely, or it was Senenmut sending out a subtle message with this statue. For years, many have suggested that Hatshepsut and Senenmut were more than just close. They were maybe lovers. Could this be Hatshepsut standing in a portrait with Senenmut? The woman does appear to be an afterthought of the statue. It is possible that she may even be the goddess Hathor, which in any case would symbolize Hatshepsut to Senenmut anyway. There is almost no real evidence that tells us outright that the relationship between Hatshepsut and Senenmut was anything more than platonic. Senenmut was very shrewd though. He is famous to us for all of his secret messages all over. Did he leave any of his secrets inside Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri? Perhaps in one of the inner sanctuaries, Senenmut left a secret note. Inside the chapel of Hathor, on one of the small niches, Senenmut himself made a crude carving on the wall, showing himself with his hands raised in worship toward the name of Hatshepsut, though neither us nor the priests were to know of this image of Senenmut in the temple. It would have been hidden behind the wooden doors that would cover it inside when opened. Being the designer of the temple, Senenmut knew exactly what he was doing, leaving a secret message hidden behind a small door that he may be with Hatshepsut for forever. Senenmut would leave over 60 of these graffiti throughout the temple, of which only one remains completely unobliterated. It seems that many years later, these images were discovered and totally removed from all memory. Even the positioning of his tomb next to Hatshepsut's temple is unusual. He was even gifted the stone sarcophagus intended for Hatshepsut's original tomb by the queen herself. This tomb also has a shaft that goes down to a small unfinished chamber that coincidentally, or not so coincidentally knowing Senenmut, is level with the burial chamber of Hatshepsut right behind the mountain in the Valley of the Kings, possibly connecting them in the afterlife too.
I really think that she considered him as someone who's near her. Maybe they were lovers. We don't have exact evidence, but she asked him. He was the director of the palace, means he was in the palace. And number two, he's the one who raised her daughter. It's very important. And actually, when I was trying to search for the tomb of Imhotep, the architect who built the step pyramid at Saqqara, I found out that Senenmut took Imhotep as his symbol.
Wow.
He put for him a chapel inside the temple, and also Senenmut is buried underneath the temple. And that is what really I believe, that Imhotep is buried inside the step pyramid.
Yeah.
Then I really believe that there was a strong relationship between Senenmut and Hatshepsut. And people say that they were lovers. It could be, but we don't have an exact evidence. But if someone, the director of the palace, raised her daughter, is buried underneath her temple, it should be someone to be important to the queen.
Yeah.
And we know that when she became a pharaoh, she had no one beside her except Senenmut.
Yeah.
And this could be someone as a lover, maybe, but maybe there was a reason that she did not marry him. We do not really know.
About the relation between Hatshepsut and Senenmut, it's a normal relation because each pharaoh should have like a teacher to his kids, and each pharaoh he has also a teacher when he was a child. So a lady, she was alone in country, her husband passed away, she was alone in a palace, so of course she needs someone to support her, to help her, to do all of these jobs. So I think the relation between each other, it was a normal relation.
A relationship between Hatshepsut and Senenmut would have been forbidden. If she married a man, that would make the royal role of Thutmosis useless. So if they did have a relationship, it would have to be very secret.
Some historians in the past suggesting that Hatshepsut and Senenmut may have been lovers, that they may have had a secret relationship. It's ridiculous to even think that a woman couldn't do anything without a man, because there's absolutely no evidence to support this claim, and in my personal opinion, this has been a nasty way to try and discredit Hatshepsut as a ruler, and it's an underestimation of Hatshepsut in the most vile form. Some historians even went as far as to call Hatshepsut the vilest type of usurper. It's utterly ridiculous that male historians back in the day could not accept a female ruler of an ancient kingdom of which they had no power or control over, and these ancient historians did everything in their power to diminish the accomplishments of one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs to have ever lived and ruled over the kingdom.
Surprisingly, we aren't the only ones to suggest a more intimate relationship between Hatshepsut. 3,500 years ago, there were already rumors of something more between the king and the commoner going around. In fact, someone felt so strongly about it that they even wrote it down. High in the mountains surrounding Deir al-Bahri, in an unfinished tomb where the workmen would come together to have a break and drink some beer. In this tomb, they all left behind their own little scribbles, over 71 to be precise. Among these graffiti, which come from the reign of Hatshepsut, are a few that would have raised the eyebrows of the public if they had seen them. The first, which is more innocent, is a crude graffiti of Senenmut himself, with his name clearly shown along with the lines on his face. But deeper inside the cave is possibly the most shocking image of Hatshepsut's reign. A man and a woman are engaged in the midst of intercourse. The man, who appears to be a commoner, is bending over a woman, We know it is a woman because of the lack of male genitalia and the presence of the defined intimate dark triangle, which is shown in all nude images of women. But this is not just a regular woman, she is wearing the Nemes headcloth worn only by the pharaoh. This graffiti shows Hatshepsut intimately with a man, but who could the man be? None other than the overseer of these men, the same man they depicted at the entrance, Senenmut. These men would have worked closely with Senenmut. Maybe he had bragged to the men about his relationship with the female pharaoh, or the men had simply speculated it and drew the image while gossiping. But who would draw such an image? There are other graffiti in the cave of men with erect phalluses. Above the Hatshepsut graffiti is a text, which tells us this is by a scribe of Hatshepsut, named Neferhotep. Reading the text above, one might expect it to be his personal thoughts. On the contrary, we find a prayer to the gods including Amun, his wife Mut, and of course Hathor. The presence of this prayer and the erotic graffiti here could suggest that they were rather talking about a specific celebration that started when Hatshepsut was pharaoh. Over at Karnak, in the far reaches of the precinct, is another, smaller temple dedicated to Amun's wife, Mut. Hatshepsut had extended this temple, and inside are stories of a festival she reignited. The god of protecting children, Bes, shown here in his dwarf form, with the face of a lion, the beard of a man. He's quite interesting looking. But apart from protecting children, Bes was the god of sex. And this is quite interesting that he's here at the Temple of Mut, because at this temple we know of a festival that took place called the Festival of Drunkenness. The festival was, in short, to recreate the story of Ra becoming angry with the Egyptians for not following the rules. He sends the goddess Sekhmet, who takes the form of a lioness to destroy mankind for their disobedience. However, the Egyptians take beer and dye it red. The lion drinks this beer, thinking it's blood, and passes out from the alcohol. She then wakes up calm, having forgotten about her mission to destroy the world. This festival was celebrated by all, common and noble. The aim was to get so drunk until you passed out, recreating Sekhmet's mission. While this happened, there was loud music, dancing, and everyone fornicated with everyone. Hatshepsut celebrated this festival twice in her reign, but whether or not the queen herself actually participated is unknown.
Between 2004 and 2007, an expedition unearthed a remarkable structure beneath the western side of the Mut temple. Column drums reveal the remains of a pillared hall, and this was dedicated by Queen Hatshepsut herself. It was identified as a monument to the goddess Mut. It was a ritual space known as the Porch of Drunkenness. One of the inscriptions reads, "She made it as a monument for her mother, Mut, mistress of Ishiru, making for her a columned portico of drunkenness anew that she might perform, given life." This is really interesting because it wasn't metaphor, it was architectural theology. The hall was designed for the celebration of the Festival of Drunkenness.
By Hatshepsut's 16th year as pharaoh with Thutmose III, in 1463 BC, Thutmose was sent to Canaan and the northern lands to yet again subdue them, which was a success. Senenmut was now dead, and a new chief architect and steward was appointed, a man named Amenhotep. His work with Hatshepsut would be her highest achievement. Hatshepsut had big plans to memorialize her recent jubilee that took place. Like Senenmut, Amenhotep went to oversee the quarrying of the stones at Jebel Silsila. This was probably for the avenue of sphinxes which lined the entrance and gardens to her temple. Amenhotep also commissioned himself a small chapel at Silsila. Then Amenhotep arrived in Aswan, where he was to oversee the excavation of 2 new and more impressive obelisks for Hatshepsut to be taken to Karnak. Amenhotep was so proud of his work for Hatshepsut on the obelisks that he would leave a record behind for us at Sahel Island, where he oversaw the excavations of more granite. On a large stone, he tells us that he was proud to oversee the works of the 2 obelisks for Hatshepsut. We can even see these 2 obelisks carved into the stone. In ancient Egyptian, they were called Tekenu. This great achievement was also recorded in Hatshepsut's Red Chapel at Karnak. Hatshepsut presenting as pharaoh before the 2 obelisks, which are being received by the god Amun, she proclaims, "The king raised these 2 great obelisks for her father Amun-Ra, with exceedingly abundant electrum atop. Their height pierces the sky and illuminates the 2 lands like the sun disk Aten itself. Never since the beginning has such a thing been done. May she be given life." Amenhotep had the 2 giant obelisks erected right at the center of Karnak. They would be visible from all over the city. In 2005, under the obelisk, it was discovered that Hatshepsut had buried a double statue of another pharaoh named Neferhotep. This would be to harness the energy from that pharaoh and transfer it to Hatshepsut. The second obelisk, however, had fallen down in antiquity. Most of it was ruined and lay on the ground for thousands of years, allowing us to get close up to the detailed parts not intended for human eyes, but for the gods. In 2022, a group of Egyptian archaeologists planned to re-raise the remaining part of Hatshepsut's fallen obelisk. The project was a success, and today the fallen obelisk of Hatshepsut stands proud yet again. Unfortunately, only one of Hatshepsut's 4 obelisks still stand complete. The pyramidion cap of one is now at the Grand Egyptian Museum. The monument was created by the Queen, not only for Amun, but also for us.
One of the most fascinating texts from the reign of Hatshepsut is an inscription on the base of one of her obelisks at Karnak. Within this text, she tells us that thousands of years in the future, generation after generation, she wants people to know why she erected such a massive obelisk, that it was for her father Amun, that she is continuing in the proper mold of king erecting monuments for the great gods of Egypt, but that she's not just doing this in an ordinary way, but in an extraordinary one.
Hatshepsut's own words remain on the obelisk.
"I declare to the people who shall be in the future, who shall observe my monument I made for my father, who shall speak in discussion, who shall look to posterity. Now my heart turns to and fro in thinking, what will the people say? They who shall see my monument after many years, and who shall speak of what I have done."
It would appear that Hatshepsut had lost her drive after year 16. Almost nothing worthy of writing down happened for the next years. She may have focused more on religion now. We do not know why this is. Could it be the death of her daughter and her most trusted advisor, or was it something else? A stela from the later years, now in the Vatican, shows Hatshepsut with Thutmose behind her, with the goddess Wasset of Luxor and the god Amun. The stela shows they are still co-pharaohs, and that now restoration of older monuments in Luxor would take place. For now, many years would pass with no news from Hatshepsut. In year 20, in 1460 BC, a stela from Serebit el-Khadem in Sinai gives us a little glimpse. A stela tells us that there began some issues up north with the Canaanites and the Mitanni. The stela says Thutmose went there with his army and would be successful for a short period. Hatshepsut would now be mentioned for one final time. In 1458 BC, Hatshepsut's 22nd ruling year. A stela from Armant is the last time we will hear of this female pharaoh. The stela tells us that on the 16th of January, the 10th day of the 6th month, in the 22nd ruling year of Hatshepsut, she had now died. Hatshepsut would be mummified as the pharaoh she was. Thutmose would have performed the final rites for his deceased stepmother. At the Red Chapel, we can even see Thutmose worshipping Hatshepsut, who is now in the form of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, showing that Hatshepsut has died and successfully reached the afterlife, becoming one with Osiris. She would be buried in the tomb of her father in the Valley of the Kings. She extended this tomb to include a chamber for herself, to be near her father, whom she honored in life. After her mummification, her internal organs would be stored in her canopic chest. The female pharaoh was placed inside her own red stone sarcophagus. On the sarcophagus, she is surrounded by the gods, helping her to reach the afterlife. At each end, Hatshepsut is shown with the goddess Isis and Nephthys, both intended to protect her body inside. On the lid, Hatshepsut appears as the goddess of the sky, Nut. Hatshepsut had been in control over Egypt for 22 years. She ruled as a female pharaoh for 15 years. Now, her time had ended. The tomb would be sealed, with Hatshepsut and her father inside, locked away to be forgotten, or at least that is what they intended, for after the death of Hatshepsut is when much of her story unfolds. Thutmose III had taken up his birthright and become full pharaoh. He would go on to rule Egypt for another 32 years. He conquered all of his enemies from south to north, making Egypt's empire the largest it had ever been. From deep in Sudan to high up in Turkey, most famous for his battle at Megiddo against the king of Kadesh and the Canaanites in 1457 BC, in Thutmose's 23rd ruling year, but now as sole pharaoh. Thutmose began his own building projects. He also erected several obelisks, saying that Aten shall illuminate them from the sky. Thutmose had many statues commissioned, now with himself as full pharaoh. Many of these deeds were overseen by his new vizier, whose tomb leaves us behind a great record of events. This is Rekhmira. His splendid place of burial is astounding. Filled with scenes from the reign of Thutmose. From these scenes we understand that this was an abundant time. He even records that many foreigners came to Egypt to give offerings to the great Pharaoh Thutmose. Many of Hatshepsut's monuments had not been completed. Thutmose saw to it that they were all finished, like at the Red Chapel at Karnak, where he completed much of the upper registers. Some of the scenes show Thutmose honoring the deceased Hatshepsut in the form of Osiris. At her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri are these giant statues of Hatshepsut as Osiris, meaning that she had now died and become one with the god of the afterlife, an imposing sight along her masterfully crafted temple.
The concept of sacred geography, because it is connected to the temple. And it has to do with two axes. One that goes from the south to the north, that is the River Nile, and the other that goes from the east to the west, that is the sun. So why would we find the temples in the west bank of the River Nile? Because if the sun rises in the east and we have the sunset in the west, sunset was regarded as the daily death of the sun god before his glorious rebirth in the east. And given its funerary nature, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple was built on the west bank of the Nile, directly across the river from the main temple of Amun in Karnak. The statues of this god, his wife Mut, and their son Hansu left their temples every year during the Opet festival, that is the beautiful feast of the valley, and crossed the Nile to visit the royal mortuary temples, including Hatshepsut's temple. And after the introduction of Christianity, Hatshepsut's temple was used as a monastery, hence its modern name, Deir el-Bahari, that is the Arabic form for Northern Monastery.
But even her temple was not totally completed. Many of the chapels had been designed, but not decorated. Rather than most scenes showing Hatshepsut, Thutmose would now add himself. Thutmose had already been included in many scenes with Hatshepsut in the temple. Now, though, the finishing touches would only show himself. This mortuary temple may be to Hatshepsut's honor, however one could see it as a temple for her entire family. Hatshepsut had almost all members of her family depicted. Her grandfather Amenhotep I, her father Thutmose I, her mother Ahmose, her brother Thutmose II, her daughter Nefertari, and her stepson Thutmose III are all shown in this temple, chosen to be there by Hatshepsut and completed by Thutmose III. Thutmose III would later have a son who was named as Crowned Prince Amenhotep II. Toward the end of Thutmose III's reign, around 1428 BC, his 52nd ruling year, he appointed his son Amenhotep II as his co-regent. And just 2 years later, the great Thutmose would die in 1425 BC, and Amenhotep II would become pharaoh. But with this new pharaoh, Hatshepsut's legacy would be threatened. All images of Hatshepsut would systematically be removed from all over the country. From Karnak Temple to Deir el-Bahari, her face was damaged, her statues beheaded, torn down, or changed her name, and her name chiseled out from all records, essentially denying Hatshepsut an afterlife, and furthermore, erasing her memory from history. At Karnak, entire images of the queen were hacked out, leaving behind a ghostly shape of the once great female pharaoh. Walls were built high around her obelisks to hide the name of Hatshepsut from all over. Whoever did this wanted the memory of a female pharaoh who defied all traditions to be forgotten and ceased to have existed at all. But who could do such a thing, and why?
Certainly after her death, there was some damnatio memoriae, but not all of it happened during his reign. A lot of it was in the Ramesside period. So, in fact, you can't put all the destruction of Hatshepsut's monuments or the erasure of her name and image, you can't lay them all at the door of Thutmose III. So this is a more complex story. There's much more going on, and we only have little strands of it, which we might be making into a completely wrong pattern.
Hatshepsut here, we know it's Hatshepsut because she has been completely chiseled out. All the chisel marks are visible here. And it's interesting because this temple, you can see the images inside the temple actually resemble Hatshepsut, not Thutmose III. It's a more feminine face. But Thutmose III came in, stamped his name, and took out Hatshepsut. But some good guy did come along at one point, and some of the names of Thutmoses have been hacked out because that guy knew that this was the real builder of this temple. As I mentioned, this is Hatshepsut, and here is an example of where someone came in. They knew that this is not Thutmosis. They came, they started chipping out his name, and someone caught them because obviously they had stopped.
Thutmose III has been hacked out on his nose, his mouth, his eyes, and his ears, so all of his senses are closed. And here, his fingers have been hacked out so he cannot perform the act of offering the jars to Amun. He's totally been deactivated. Many Egyptologists have theories that all counter each other. We may never know for sure. Egyptology, however, is a forever evolving science. Theories come and go, new evidence is discovered, and some old evidence proves or cancels new theories. Not one version of history is set in stone. New evidence is providing new thinking about who removed Hatshepsut and why they did so. For over 100 years or so, historians have speculated that it was Thutmose III being vengeful against his so-called wicked stepmother for taking the throne for half of his life, that it was he who had removed Hatshepsut from her monuments. But I don't think so.
She even dressed as a man, but the Egyptian never forgive her. And therefore, many people believe that Thutmose III, who is the one who killed her and destroyed her monuments. I found out that's not true at all.
While making this documentary, I was seeing more and more evidence that in fact Thutmose did not hate Hatshepsut. To the contrary, actually. Many scenes show them having a very close relationship. Hatshepsut had gone into battle in Nubia with Thutmose. They went on the Punt expedition. She gave him much of his training on how to be pharaoh. They are depicted together many times. He completed her monuments and even shows himself honoring Hatshepsut.
The most important discovery that I made recently in Luxor, we found the Valley Temple of Queen Hatshepsut. You know, her temple, funerary temple, was fronted by a causeway. The causeway ended with a valley temple. We discovered inside this temple over 1,500 blocks, beautifully decorated with scenes. We found the name of Hatshepsut everywhere. We found the name of Sinmut as the director of the palace. And the most important discovery inside, that we discovered the name of Thutmose III as a king, means that Thutmose III did maintain the cult of the queen. And this is another important evidence to announce that Thutmose III did not murder the queen. He did not destroy her monuments. And therefore, we now have to announce to the whole world and to everyone, don't say anymore that Thutmose III is the one who murdered the queen or destroyed the monuments. But we have evidence that her monuments were destroyed at the end of the reign of Thutmose III and the beginning of the reign of his son, Amenhotep II.
The son of Thutmose III is not so innocent. For a doorway from Deir el-Bahri has clear marks where the name of Hatshepsut was replaced with his, Amenhotep II. Even statues that should appear to be Hatshepsut have been altered to the name of Amenhotep II. From my research, it is clear that Amenhotep II would have had stories about his aunt Hatshepsut being a pharaoh during the reign of his father Thutmose III. He was outraged by the blasphemous act of a woman becoming a pharaoh, and her being a pharaoh in the time of his father. Amenhotep II had to erase the rule of Hatshepsut, not only to appease the gods, but also to raise the legitimacy of his father's reign, as well as legitimizing his own right to the throne of Egypt. Thus, the female pharaoh had to be forgotten. More evidence of this comes from the mortuary temple of Thutmose III. next to Hatshepsut's Deir el-Bahri temple. This temple had been mostly covered in debris from ancient earthquakes. In 1907, an intact chapel of Hathor was discovered in Thutmose's temple, and inside this chapel was a striking life-size statue of the goddess Hathor in the form of a cow. In front of the cow stands a pharaoh. His name indicated Amenhotep II, but it's clearly changed. The decorations in the chapel are clearly Thutmose's, so it's safe to say that the statue rarely depicts Thutmose III. Traces of blue paint under the red paint tell us the cow too was recolored. On the side of the statue, we can see a young pharaoh suckling from Hathor. This would clearly be Thutmose, not his son Amenhotep, because on the walls of the chapel, we can see Thutmose suckling from Hathor. The reason this was most likely changed is that Hatshepsut is given the title of Hathor on earth. For Thutmose to be shown so close to Hathor meant he would be so close with Hatshepsut, who would have protected him in a motherly way. By bringing the name forward to Amenhotep II, the representation of Hathor would now shift to the wife of Thutmose and the mother of Amenhotep, who is present in the shrine.
Well, it must have been a great feeling of accomplishment to know that we can now say, thanks to your findings, that Thutmose III was actually a good guy.
Yes, this is very important to really say, because in every book, in every tour guide, everyone saying, "Oh, Thutmose III did that." No, Thutmose III did not do this based on the two evidence. Number one, that she died because of cancer. Number two is the discovery of his name as a king inside the Valley Temple of Queen Hatshepsut that we discovered. And we really think that near this temple, we think that maybe an area that contained the tombs of Seknen Ra, the one who started to fight the Hyksos, and his son Ahmose and Ahmose I. We believe that Sinmut and Hatshepsut came to this area to stop any kind of constructions or temples after Dynasty 17.
The other theory of why Hatshepsut was removed is linked to Senenmut. It is possible that during the reign of Amenhotep II, the wooden doors in the offering niches at Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri needed to be changed. When removed, the priests would have been shocked to find the numerous secret self-made graffiti of Senenmut worshipping Hatshepsut. This could have caused more speculation of the rumors of their love affair. If Hatshepsut did have an intimate relationship with this commoner, it could impact the line of succession for Thutmose and his son. But why was Hatshepsut's legacy tarnished? We may never really know, though not all pharaohs in the future would despise Hatshepsut that much. In the decades to follow, Pharaoh Ramses II and his son had a mission to restore all of the existing monuments of previous pharaohs, and this included the Temple of Hatshepsut, where Ramses even placed his name next to Hatshepsut on the wall of her greatest journey, the Punt expedition.
So we have a text from the 25th dynasty about a princess, his name Ma'at Kara, as you see, Ma'at Kara. So even the 25th dynasty, they recognize Hatshepsut and respect her, so they give same name for their daughters, Ma'at Kara.
And centuries later, when the Greeks were in Egypt, they added their own shrine inside the sanctuary of Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, most likely by a fellow female pharaoh, the Greek female pharaoh Arsinoe II, who would have considered Hatshepsut as a feminine inspiration. Hatshepsut was not forgotten by all. For year after year, many women would visit the temple and leave offerings to the goddess Hathor in hopes of having a blessed pregnancy.
Hatshepsut should be remembered as an incredible woman who managed to rule Egypt for several years, who made sure that monuments prospered, people prospered, that there were diplomatic relations with her neighbors. And Egypt, in fact, enjoyed an incredibly peaceful time under her, and was also under Thutmose III, because they did have that co-regency, was also a very strong, powerful part of the sort of Near East.
Centuries would pass since the death of Hatshepsut. Then, around 1000 BC, the priests had to move all of the previous pharaohs' mummies, dating back to the start of the 18th dynasty, into a new location. This was done to spare the royal mummies, which were sacred, from being destroyed by tomb robbers. This relocation project would see many of the royal mummies moved to a safe place together, including many of Hatshepsut's family. One of the biggest collections of royal mummies was hidden behind Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri. It wasn't until 1881 that all of these mummies were discovered. For the first time, the true faces of Hatshepsut's family could be seen. Yet despite this joy, none of the female mummies were able to be identified as Hatshepsut. Her mummy may not have been placed in the main cache. Then, in 1903, Howard Carter discovered an undecorated tomb in the Valley of the Kings, which contained two female mummies. One lay on the floor, the other on her sarcophagus. In 1906, only one mummy was removed from the tomb. She had been identified as Sitra, the wet nurse of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, while the other mummy was left, and the tomb sealed and forgotten. Until 1989, when Egyptologist Donald Ryan rediscovered the tomb. The American team documented the findings, including a small canopic box with Hatshepsut's name on it, and a wooden mask with a notch under the chin intended only for a pharaoh, and of course the anonymous female mummy on the floor, whose wrappings had been ripped apart in antiquity to steal the golden amulets that adorned her. It was not until 2007 that Dr. Zahi Hawass removed the mummy from the tomb to finally identify her.
I began to search for the mummy of Queen Hatshepsut, and this was a great adventure for me. I collected every mummy of a queen or a princess that has no name from Cairo Museum and from the Valley of the Kings. And after that, I took all these mummies to Cairo Museum. We scanned all the mummies. And also we scanned the mummy of her father, Thutmose I, the mummy of her husband and brother, Thutmose II, and the mummy of her stepson, Thutmose III. The most interesting thing about our scanning, that the mummy of Thutmose I, we found out that the hands were in the side. And
not crossed.
You know that every king of the new kingdom, the hands are crossed like that. Number two, we discovered inside the mummy there is an arrowhead. Means that this person died in an accident or a war, which is very strange. I really think that this mummy labeled in the Cairo Museum is not really Thutmose I. And number two, about Thutmose II, very strange things happened to him. He was buried in the western Thebes. That recently his tomb was found, completely destroyed by the flood. But outside the tomb found an inscription that Hatshepsut built this tomb for her husband. Now, this is very strange, because why this king is the only king to be buried in the Western Valley? Why not Hatshepsut herself, who buried Thutmose II, was not buried beside him? I believe that the first one who used the Valley of the Kings is Hatshepsut. But really what bothers me as an Egyptologist, a big question, why she buried Thutmose II in the Western Valley? Why she did not be buried beside him if she buried him? Then we have a big question. Then I did look at all the mummies. We scanned all of them. And after that, we have one important object, dated from the reign of Hatshepsut, and that was a canopic box made of wood, contained the name and the liver of the queen. One day when I was scanning the mummies in the Cairo Museum, I asked my assistant Hisham al-Lisi, I said, bring this box, I need to see the liver of the queen. We put the box under the CT scan, and we found out actually that we found the liver and a part of the stomach, and the surprise was one tooth, and that really was big. Then I brought radiologist and dentist, and they began to look at all the teeth of the mummies. We found one mummy that we brought from KV60, and KV60 is the tomb of the wet nurse of Queen Hatshepsut, that her mummy is in the Cairo Museum now. I always thought that this is the mummy of Hatshepsut, but now beside her was found this mummy, and beside this mummy in KV60 was some tools that can show that this mummy could be for a king. Then we found one gap in the mummy that I brought from KV60, that this tooth fits exactly. Then what happened? It seemed that Hatshepsut had problems with her teeth. While they were doing the mummification, then one tooth fell down. Then they took the tooth and they put it in the canopic box that contained the liver and the stomach of the queen.
Because it's sacred, it's part of her body.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then we found the mummy, and I scanned the mummy. We found out that Hatshepsut died in the age of 55. She was obese. Her teeth was in a very bad condition. And I found out one important fact, that she had diabetes. And she died on the side because of cancer. Means Thutmose III did not murder her.
Dr. Hawass and his team had found the mummy of the long-forgotten queen, the mummy that had been moved into the tomb of her wet nurse in the 21st dynasty by the priests, Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut, she underrated, and Cleopatra, she's overrated. With all love and respect to Cleopatra, but comparing to Hatshepsut, she's like little child. If we look at the value of Hatshepsut, a lady controlled masculine world since 3,400 years ago for 20 years. It's something not easy at all. If we look to all empires and history of human beings, for example, the Roman Empire, how many ladies they controlled them? Nothing. The Arabic Empire or Islamic Empire, we have only one lady. She ruled only for 3 months. Her name, Shajar al-Dor. So if we look at Hatshepsut, controlled for 20 years as a very strong and powerful ruler to Egypt, is something real valuable. And if the Americans one day make a film about Hatshepsut, same as they did with Cleopatra, all the world will know Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut is really someone whom I think a lot of women look up to and think of as a role model, because she is someone who navigated politics, domestic affairs, the arts, everything, and came out on top for quite a long time.
Hatshepsut truly wanted to be known as one of the greatest kings of Egypt. And I think it's important when looking at her reign, not just to see her as a great female king, but a great king in her own right.
When I first encountered Hatshepsut, it wasn't just her titles or her temple that struck me. It was the audacity, the clarity, the refusal to be defined by precedent. She didn't wait for permission. She carved herself into history, literally. That's why we remember her, not because she was exceptional for a woman, but because she was exceptional, full stop.
Hatshepsut has always been my personal favorite woman of ancient times. She was incredible, she did incredible things, and she made a kingdom flourish.
My favorite pharaoh, because she was indeed a pharaoh, Hatshepsut.
And we have to remember this great lady that she ruled Egypt, and she tried to convince the Egyptian that she has the right for the throne. Hatshepsut, if you talk about a powerful woman, you don't talk about Cleopatra anymore.
Yeah.
Number one, you talk about Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was the most powerful woman in history.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr. Hawass.
Thank you. Okay.
Hatshepsut's legacy will live on as one of the strongest female rulers of the ancient world, conquering enemies and creating monuments that we still marvel upon today. After all, that is what she wanted. She told us this on her colossal obelisk.
I declare to the people who shall be in the future, who shall observe my monument, who shall speak in discussion, who shall look to posterity. Now, my heart turns to and fro in thinking, what will the people say, they who shall see my monument after many years? And who shall speak of what I have done?